Hello, and welcome to our extended disc webinar. Today's topic is using disc to land that first job. My name is Christina Bowser. I'm the training director here at Extended Disc, and joining me today is my colleague, Marku Kaupinen, president of Extended Disc.
Hi, Christina, and hi, everybody. Hope you're having a great day.
Cold, but it's a beautiful day.
We're cold even in Texas today.
I know. As always, we are recording this webinar, and it will be available on our website as well as on our YouTube channel. We encourage your questions, but we don't take them live, so feel free to put them in the Q&A box, and we will follow up with you after. So, Marku, I'm sure we all remember at least one of our very first interviews, and it probably was not any much easier or just as nerve-wracking as any interviews now, but we just didn't have the experience then as well, right?
Yeah, thanks for reminding me of my nightmares. No, it's been a long time, but yeah, I remember the interviews. I think most people can remember at least a couple of interviews because we do get pretty tense, and it's a pressure-filled moment, and it's something that we just tend to remember, well, typically for the rest of our lives, because it is a significant event. And I think that's why this topic is so popular, because people do want to talk about how can I make a better impression and perform better at the job interviews. I'm really, really hoping that my kids are listening to this because they could really learn something from Dad for once.
Yeah, the interview process is completely different now with online. But, you know, we all remember kind of the core. You know, a lot of times even our universities prepare us, be on time, dress appropriately, come with questions. But what more can we do? How can DISC help us? So, one of the things I always say is when you're new to not only the career path, but to the interview process, you're essentially applying for jobs that you're competing against people that are just like you. So what is going to make us stand out?
Yeah, that's a great point. I remember, and my experiences lately have been the person who's doing the interviews. And by the time you're interviewing people, the candidates, typically at that stage, everybody's pretty similar, similar experience, education, background. And of course, you're looking at their resumes and sometimes cover letters or emails, and it looks pretty similar. So actually, I think people a lot of times forget this, that the person who's doing the interview actually is feeling pressure as well, because they are faced with a pretty important decision. When you decide to hire somebody, it has a long-term consequences. And of course, if you make a bad hiring decision, it's very expensive and very time-consuming. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting dynamic. And when we talk about not only job interviews, but DISC in general, and real life in general, we tend to kind of compartmentalize things. We put it in different sections. And I think what we're talking about today in this webinar actually applies to just about all human interactions.
Right. And, so how do you prepare and present the best you? What will make you stand out? Like Marku says, when as an interviewer, you receive, a lot of the same types of applications. To us, comes down to the interaction. How well do you go into that interaction and come out of that interaction? And remember, interactions, even though we oftentimes think of interviews it's an opportunity to talk about myself, to sell myself. I have a limited time, I have to do it. But you cannot forget that person on the other end of the interaction, as you said.
Well, yeah, I'm so glad you bring that point up, because it's almost like a bad date. The cliche of bad date is going to meet somebody and all they do is talk about themselves, how wonderful they are. Within 5 minutes, you are tuning that person out, because nobody wants to hear about everything and all the wonderful things that may or may not be true about who the other person is. Really, what you're looking for is having a very comfortable interaction where you are sharing information. And ultimately, what you would like to do is really try to determine from both sides if this is a good fit. If it's not a good fit for the job applicant, of course, sometimes we are pressured to get that job, but really getting the bad job, something that is not good for you, honestly, is not a good solution. You're better off sometimes getting a no for that type of an opportunity.
Right. And, with coming into an interview, you really want to be able to have that self-awareness about yourself. In terms of preparing, you do need to talk about your strengths, and you also have to prepare for most interviewers will ask you, what's your biggest weakness? And if you already understand your behavioral style and talking about, I understand these are areas that I can develop, but develop myself in. But I love how Marku was talking about when he went to an interview, he understood his weaknesses, he understood his development areas, and spin it in a way that makes it a positive, right?
Yeah, I was good at it. I had a lot of stuff to spin. so, so, so in this job interview, I think the key point in this webinar is really to have the awareness that one, if I want to be successful in life and in job interviews, I must have that confident self-awareness. I must be very comfortable who I am, both the strengths and development areas. And in a job interview context, if you are able to really realize that it's not all about me, it's really about the other person who's interviewing. They are making the decision about who is the best fit for this job, and it's their responsibility and their challenge to make that decision. And really, you are there to help that person to make that decision. And when you are having an authentic conversation and you are able to really be comfortable in your own skin, that shows beyond words. It shows
point.
beyond what the message is. And when you are interacting with somebody, and we all can think about these conversations when we really feel that this other person, there's something about them that I'm drawn to.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about those conversations and those interactions, you begin to realize that that person really behaves in a way, even if they're different from us, but you can see and sense that they are comfortable with who they are.
Right.
And that is that confident self-awareness.
And I think, by bringing, as Marku says, that authenticity to the interaction, it really does not only make you comfortable, it makes the interviewer comfortable, and it really highlights whether you are a good match for that job. Because sometimes, as I think you mentioned earlier, sometimes the job we're applying for isn't necessarily the best fit for us. And by, putting forth putting forth ourselves when we're not who we truly are, maybe you'll land that job, but then you might not last in that job, right?
Absolutely. And I remember my experiences a long time ago getting out of school. And I'm dating myself. We went to newspapers looking at job advertisements, and I would circle the ones that seemed interesting and good opportunities. And then I would clip those ads and I would look for the keywords that they would place there. Like they're looking for somebody aggressive or competitive and different words. And I would tend to take my pretty stock standard cover letter and I would incorporate those words in my cover letter. And then I would keep a copy of that cover letter for my little binder, and I would tape that little ad on that cover letter. And if I were lucky enough to get a phone call from that organization in ABC Inc., you apply for us, would you mind taking a few moments to talk with us on the telephone? I would just say, would you mind giving me just 30 seconds? Let me go to another room where I have a little bit more privacy and it's more quiet. I would take my binder out and look for the ads and look for those words that I use because, they're looking for these words. And I would incorporate those words into the conversation. Now, a lot of those words had nothing to do with who I am. And had I gotten those jobs, looking back now, I don't think I would have lasted very long. Ultimately, you want to get a job that is a good fit for you in terms of your style and who you are as a person, your values, because then you are positioned for long-term success with an organization.
Exactly. And, we brought it up before, but maybe let's talk a little bit more about it, that, an interview itself it's an interaction. It's an interaction between you, the person being interviewed, as well as the interviewer. So what types of skills could we have to help us kind of improve that interaction by identifying the style of that particular interviewer?
Yeah, really what we're talking about here, I want to stand out from the rest. Mm-hmm. And one best way to really is to making a connection with the person who's interviewing you. And when you begin to identify their style and understand how to speak their language, so to speak, mm-hmm. you are using the same kind of behavioral style and you're matching that behavior, it makes it a lot more comfortable for the other person, the person who's asking those questions, to get relaxed and be calm and actually focus a little bit more on what you are saying and be in a place where they can really think about, hey, would this person be a good fit for this position that we have open? So if you fail to think about this aspect, I think it makes it very difficult for you to stand out. Because most people will be talking about how wonderful they are and why they should be
Mhm.
hired. If you don't do that and you're actually having an authentic conversation, you will stand out.
Exactly. And, we do say, as important as it is to, practice identifying styles of others, like if you know that, maybe that interviewer is a little more talkative, maybe chat a little more. However, don't jump to conclusions, right?
That's right. And we already mentioned this, that I think both individuals will be somewhat caught it and a little bit, they feel a little bit of pressure. And when we feel that pressure, we tend to revert to our natural style and often lose the ability or even awareness that we need to modify our behavior. And when we are able to be prepared and we are calm and we have the confident self-awareness, then we can think about how I need to modify my behavior. And then I begin to really pay attention to the person interviewing me, and I begin to look for behavioral patterns to identify their style. Because the biggest mistake, and we talked about this before, is that when it comes to identifying somebody's style, is that we jump into conclusion about who they are too soon. And if we make the wrong conclusion, we actually worse off than not modifying our behavior at all.
Right. So, example I like to give is, let's just say you go into it and, you think, oh, wow, this person's probably an I style, chatty, friendly. And then so you think, okay, I know I style, right? I'm going to maybe pick up the pace a little, maybe be a little more chatty, don't focus so much on details. But then it turns out, as you talk more to them, oh, wow, maybe they weren't so much an I style. Maybe they were more of an S style. And by going too quickly and avoiding details, you might have gotten yourself into trouble.
Yeah, what's going to happen is that the interviewer is going to think about, hey, that person looked really good on paper. I really like the qualifications, but there was something about it just didn't feel right. I can't put my finger on it, but something just didn't feel right. And typically it goes back to these kind of frictions that sometimes we have when we're communicating with the other person. If we're not really identifying who they are and making those important modifications to be more effective, that could be something that will happen. So we need to be very careful not to jump into conclusions, look for those behavioral patterns, and then modify our behavior appropriately.
Right. And, here I just reminded myself at this point, not just first interview, this information is so valuable. So actually what I'd like for you to do, Marku, is just kind of give us some main takeaways from this topic.
Well, it's a great point you make. That it is, of course, we're talking about interviews today, but it applies to every human interaction. If you think about you being a salesperson, if you do these things, you focus on the prospect, not on yourself. Mm-hmm. If you are a manager, you focus on the employee, not yourself. So if we kind of turn that focus away from us and focus on the other person a little bit more, and especially be very conscious of that when we are under pressure, that's when we're going to be more successful. So I guess three main takeaways from today, I would say, is one is that you need to have that confident self-awareness. That is really the foundation for success. I cannot remember ever meeting somebody who was successful and was not confidently self-aware. Doesn't matter what their behavioral style is, but the confidence must be there. Second, of course, and you brought this up, is preparation. We need to prepare. Of course, we need to do homework about the organization, what they're looking for, but we also need to prepare thinking about who we are and what our tendencies, what our kind of problems or blind spots that we need to make sure, or kind of traps that we don't step on, and we just go into that interview being calm and ready and prepared. And finally, again, don't focus on yourself. Focus on that other person. Whenever we focus on the other person more than ourselves, good things typically will come out.
That's right. The interview is an interaction. So thank you for joining me, Marku, today.
Thank you.
We do have another webinar coming up. It's Those Other Styles Are So Frustrating.
By the way, completely unrelated to today's topic, all right?
Totally. Yeah. And that will be coming up next Wednesday, November 20th. From 3 to 3:15, and Marku will be here with my other colleague, Amy. So please join us then.
That's going to be a good topic. And go to our website, extendeddisk.org, and on the top right hand, you will see a toolbar, you see events. There you will see all of our upcoming webinars and other events. And if any of those webinars look interesting, make sure you register, even if you can't make the time, because we will, after the webinar, email the recording as long as you register.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.